And I'm going to turn the mic over to Tim Pagliara, our CapWealth chairman and CEO, and he's going to be leading the program today. So, Tim.
That applause was more than I deserved. Early this morning, I got a text message from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi asking me to delay this State of the Union address in the interest of my personal safety and the viability of our firm. I'm not going to tell you how I responded. 10 years ago, there was a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation in the world.
Considering how hard I work to make what I have, I don't understand why I'm so dumb with money. The single dumbest thing I do is invest in the stock market. It's okay if you know what you're doing, but I have no idea what I'm doing, and I suspect I'm typical of a lot of Americans too. We know how to make money, but we don't know what to do once we get it. I have stock in 2 companies that I've never even heard of. I don't even know what they make. Probably all they make is money. Why in the world do I risk my hard-earned, soft-earned money investing in something about which I know so little? Big money's confusing, of course. Bailouts, short-selling derivatives, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Recently, Merrill Lynch agreed to sell itself to Bank of America for $50 billion. What's that all about? Sell itself? Who gets the $50 billion? And here's another headline. U.S. to lend AIG $85 billion. Well, the U.S. is us, you and me, but I don't think many of us know what AIG is. I looked it up, and it means American International Group. What are we doing, lending $85 billion of our money to some company most of us never even heard of? I don't even really know what $85 billion is, let alone this $700 billion bailout. If I had $1 billion, could I pave my driveway, paint the bedroom over the garage, and replace the worn carpet on the back stairway? How high would $1 billion be if you stacked it up in a pile of $1 bills? That's the kind of information I'd need to understand what $700 billion is. There's probably a good case to be made for someone like me keeping his money under the mattress. We turn the mattress every couple of months, so at least I get to look at it once in a while. Maybe I'll go to the bank tomorrow, if it's still there, and ask them to show me my money, just to make sure they still have it. Right now, all I have in my pocket is $17 and change. Does that qualify me for a bailout?
That was Andy Rooney a little over 10 years ago. And fear dominated the world. And the theme of what we'll talk about today is facts, not fear. Number one fear that every investor should have is inflation. Like I said, we're going to now give you some of the facts to back that up. If you look at the inflation rate since 1980 and you compare it to the things that you and I purchase on a daily basis and the things that really matter, you can see how there's been tremendous growth in a lot of different areas. And the one that I'd focus on the most is the cost of educating kids. And when you look at that, you can see why that has become such a dominant theme. And all you have to do is take a look at Nashville and the area around us and how we've grown since 1980. And look at the growth rate of private schools. You know, there hasn't been a new private school in Nashville since Endworth. And being very familiar with the schools and the endowment funds and the struggle that they struggle every year to continue to put butts in the seats that they have at full tuition without financial aid. And so that gives you some idea of how the impact of inflation, what it has on your purchasing power. And to put that into dollar terms, you can see that $10,000 back in 1980, just at the Consumer Price Index, you'd need $34,000 just to stay even. And to put that in a different context, If you retired in 1980 and you had $1 million, today you'd need $3,465,000 to have the same purchasing power that you did in 1980. It's the old saying, $1 million isn't what it used to be. So whether you are age 30 in the cycle of trying to educate your kids, or you're 80 and you're worried about the cost of health care and having to educate your grandkids, inflation is the biggest fear that every investor should have. This next slide will just absolutely terrify you. You look at the cost of beer since 1980. And I always get attention from the guys in the room because, as we found over the years, it's women in a household, they make the decisions when it finally comes down to saving money and retirement. And you can see it. The cost of everything goes up. And I've purposely kept the bar closed today because of that. Today, global markets have changed everything. And the best way that I can explain that is in a simple, single term, and that is imbalance. There are imbalances all over the world. And those imbalances have created stresses between governments. They've created tensions in national security. They've created the types of problems that we're addressing today, for example, with a trade war. China exports $500 billion worth of goods and services to the United States. We import $100 billion in goods and services from China. That's an imbalance. In 1990, Japan was a nation of exports. 28 years later, they've got one of the largest, most struggling economies in the world. In fact, it was just this past week, Chinese dictator warned of grave social consequences that they are going to have to address because of the imbalances of exporting and not creating their own middle class and the problems that they're going to have with aging. And I've said many times, I wouldn't trade our problems for the problems that they're now just beginning to address. So, as a firm, what we struggle with is how do we strategize and think about navigating through these global struggles and the things that we hear about on a daily basis in something that's based upon fact and not fear. And in order to do that, factually, we have to look at the data. Where have the returns been? And what do you as investors, what's the most important thing to you as you approach retirement, as you're in retirement, and everything that goes in between? And if you look up on this chart, Treasury bonds returns, this is the last 50 years now, so that gives you a pretty good trend line. The average yield on Treasury bonds was 6.76%. You couldn't get that in the last 10 years on Treasury bonds. In fact, you had a difficulty getting a return on money at all in those types of assets. But assuming in the last 50 years you put money in Treasury bonds, you had to pay taxes, you had to negate the effect of inflation with the rise in the consumer price index of 4.12%. And after you net those two things out, you lost money. So when you invest in Treasury bills or Treasury bonds or real estate and you pay taxes, it's just a question of how much money are you going to lose relative to inflation. When you look at stocks, the compound average annual rate of return for 50 years has been 9.95%. That creates a compelling case for the ownership of equities, the things that will protect your money against the thing that you fear and should fear the most, which is inflation. And this becomes even more compelling when you start to examine compounding of money and the impact of compounding of money. the difference between 6.76% and 9.95% is very intangible until you look at actual dollar amounts. This is a theme that we'll weave through for the rest of the presentation. You know, that treasury bonds, the highest yielding of those assets, $10,000 compounded in 1968 grew to $280,000 versus $1,262,715 if you had just invested in the 500 largest companies in the United States during that same time period. So compounding of money makes a difference. And the difference of 1 or 2% makes a huge difference over a long period of time. So the active management of successful businesses has beaten inflation. And that's what you own when you own a common stock. That's what you own when you have that asset class. And it takes creativity, vision, conviction, and a lot of facts to create the long-term success that you saw on that chart. And as we try to put together the right combination of assets that make you and will help you be successful long-term, we do a lot of different types of looks. And John Lucan, who's here, is the chief investment strategist. John does an amazing job on a daily basis just going through the facts, looking at the data. And the two of us, along with our investment policy committee, we work through those decisions and how we allocate money, and as you'll see, why we were so different than the rest of the world in the last 10 years. And one of those, the companies that we looked at, illustrates the point really well. We first purchased Boeing in 2013, and as timing would have it, it was a very large purchase that we spread throughout our client base, and it was about 2 days before they had the first big fire on the Dreamliner. The batteries, they had a problem with the batteries on that plane. And Boeing had a horrible drop, and there was a lot of confusion. And this was before John had even joined the firm. And so it was just Phoebe and I, and we had a long weekend of text messaging back and forth. What do we do? You know, what is the impact of this? And so we looked at the facts. We looked at what people were afraid of, and the facts showed a company full of brilliant engineers that we made an assumption that they would figure out how to solve the battery problem. And they had every plane at that time sold that they could produce for the next 8 to 9 years. And that hasn't changed from today. And so it was $94 a share in 2013 in the middle of all that fear. And yet today it's about 4 times that, around $350 a share. But what's more important is what that has done for you as clients, as investors in general. Trying to offset the rising prices of inflation, you need rising streams of income. In 2013, Boeing paid 50 cents a share in dividends. Today, they pay $2.06 a share in dividends. And they've raised their dividends double digits in all but 2013. In fact, as you can see from the slide, some years it was 50%, 25%. This past year in 2019, they raised the dividend 20%. That's the type of impact company that you have to offset the impact of inflation. Another company, Johnson & Johnson, and went back to 1975, investing $10,000 at a 10.6% compound average annual rate of return versus inflation at 3.85%. And you start to see the meaning behind these numbers. This is what Warren Buffett understands better than anybody else in the world, the impact of compounding. You know, the difference between $50,700 and owning an asset that years later is worth $765,000. You know, this is a mistake that people make by not owning assets like this that's played out very well through a lot of the work Phoebe does in generational planning and the families that she works with. And a couple of the books illustrate the Rockefellers versus the Vanderbilts. And today, despite the fact that Commodore Vanderbilt was the wealthiest man in the world in the 1800s, there's not a single heir that's even a millionaire today, because they didn't pay attention to inflation and they dissipated those assets over time. Whereas the Rockefellers generationally are a powerhouse. I'm trying to find statistically, but I would bet you they give away more money today to charity than they did back after Rockefeller died, and it's created the family legacy. So we put all this together and we call it CapWealth Moneyball. And you've all heard me over time talk about one of my passions is baseball, and how the game of baseball was changed when a general manager of the Oakland Athletics, with the lowest budget in the league and the worst owners in the league, paired up with a young Yale statistician, and he started to make decisions about players not based upon how he felt, but based upon data, and all kinds of data. The scouts used to be impressed by the big old country boy that could hit a ball 500 feet. He wasn't as concerned about that as how many times he hit home runs when there were men on base, or how many times he struck out, or a whole list of statistics. And so he put together a team that went all the way to the World Series, came close, but lost the World Series. And he had the lowest payroll in the league, and everybody followed suit. Everybody copied him after that. And so we have focused on facts and data and returns and the alternatives. And I've spent millions of dollars since I started the firm 18 years ago in systems that document what the return is on your money and what the return is on your money relative to inflation and the S&P 500 and other variables. As I tell people, working with investors is the same today as it was 35 years ago. When Tim and I were young advisors, and I was at Edward Jones, and I was actually setting up the financial planning department, and we were teaching other advisors, we used to have a basic slide just like this. When you're talking to a client, you describe investments as tools to meet financial needs. You have to decide what those needs are and describe them for people. You've got a need for income. You've got a need for your income to grow. You've got a need for your assets to grow. And whether you are that 30-year-old parent that's terrified about the cost of education and struggling with the cost of private schools, or you're the 80-year-old that's now looking at long-term care or educating your grandchildren, as many of you do, what we try and do is help you define that legacy, how to fine-tune that with the data and the best possible decisions, not based upon how we feel, not about Andy Rooney's little spoof about how he felt in 2008, but we try to help you define what you want your legacy to be so that we have more people relative to their station in life that end up like the Rockefellers instead of the Vanderbilts. And when you focus on this, again, it's that difference. What is the difference of 1%? And if you look at someone with $1 million and a 25-year time horizon, it's a little over $2 million. If you're an endowment fund with $10 million, 25-year time horizon, it's $27 million. We manage some endowment funds for educational institutions, and at times it gets contentious about how money should be allocated, how it should be invested. And I'm taking an advocate role for the long term, for their legacy. And I remember one of those meetings recently, they I finally, a little frustrated, I said, well, what is your time horizon? And I said, school's been around for over 100 years. Do you plan on shutting down in the next 5 years? And they said, well, no. So how long do you plan on being an institution in business? Well, we're looking for the next 100 years. And I said, then invest your money like you're going to be around for the next 100 years. At 2%, it's even more dramatic. It's a difference of $6 million or $61 million. Like I said, we capture that data. We have the ability, and this is a report from January 22nd, so just 2 days ago, through the close of business. It showed exactly what the return on every dollar in our firm was, at 6.63% versus 5.03% for the S&P 500. We can do that with each one of your accounts. We know what contributed to the success of your account, what detracted from the success of your account. Wealth accumulation is a long-term process, and that crisis, and most of the time, the best opportunities occur in the middle of a crisis. Crisis equals opportunity. And I remember, along with Andy Rooney and a lot of other people, Susie Orman back in 2008 made the statement, and people acted on this, that no one over the age of 60 should own common stocks. And they missed the biggest market opportunity, probably one of the largest in history in the last 10 years. So in 2008, we identified some extraordinary opportunities. 10 years later, one of them worked. And many of you that were clients during that period of time remember how stressful it was. And I used to have, Tim and I would have these meetings like this in a large conference room that we had at the office, and they were packed, and we would have them about every 2 weeks, 2 to 3 times a day. And one of the things that we identified during that period was an opportunity in the housing market. We felt like there were some issues in the housing market that didn't translate across the entire spectrum of the universe, and that most of the problem in housing was with the large banks that were too leveraged, that had engaged in speculative lending. And when the United States Treasury put Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in conservatorship, I had done a lot of research on both of those companies over the years, and they're two of the most valuable financial services franchises in the world of finance. It is the simplest business model. It's the easiest to track, very easy to explain. If there's a 4% mortgage, if you have a 4% mortgage, the investor that they sell those mortgages packaged up to, they may get 3.5%. The other 0.5% stays with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's the largest predictable stream of cash flow of any financial institution in the world. It's over $30 billion a year. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have been in conservatorship since 2008. And in conservatorship in 2017, they paid $27 billion in federal income tax. So they are among the most profitable, if not the most profitable corporations in the world. And so 10 years ago, we took on that fight that led us to all sorts of amazing places. And over the next few weeks, you're going to see where the United States Treasury is going to announce a plan of recapitalization and release. And all of a sudden, that value that we've had locked up in those shares for 10 years is going to explode. They're going to be worth, over the course of the next 18 months, probably 4 to 5 times what they're worth now. And I know that because I've got data, and I went all the way to the center of the action. I've spoken to the attorneys. I have attended countless sessions with wealth management firms like Capital Group that have had a vested interest in seeing that these companies be rehabilitated. It goes so far as the nominee for the Federal Housing Finance Administration, his name is Mark Calabria. And Mark Calabria and Michael Kriminger wrote a white paper for me in my role as executive director of Investors Unite, and talked about the illegal nature of the government's taking of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And Michael Kriminger, former general counsel of FDIC, like I said, he wrote amicus briefs on every case that hit the U.S. Court of Appeals, arguing that as the author of HERA with Mark Calabria, what the government was doing was illegal. And then when you paired that with doing the right thing to recapitalize and put those entities back out, all of it's come together at once. In fact, yesterday there was, it's called an en banc hearing for the non-lawyers in the room, and when there's a division of opinion in a specific three-judge panel in the Court of Appeals, they will bring all the judges in that circuit together. And they were together yesterday in New Orleans, and the government argued their case for why taking 100% of the earnings and profits of these two companies was justified. And then, you know, the private investors that have led the charge in litigation argued their case. And it's pretty amazing to finally hear, you know, some justice from these judges. One judge in particular, after getting an argument from the attorney representing the Federal Housing Finance Administration, she said, "Young man, you weren't even born during one of the crises that I ruled on, and we've never allowed the government to take 100% of the earnings and profits of a company that was in conservatorship." And so all these things are coming together, and it's really, it almost by necessity changes the way we have to manage this firm, because we've grown and we are going to grow with everything that we have in the pipeline, and it could be several $100 million that everybody will make as this investment thesis unwinds. John and I have a lot of work to do. I've held the title of CEO of this firm since I started it. And it's been an amazing ride. One of my clients about 10 years ago, he said, "What happens if you get hit by a bus?" And I said, "I don't know." I didn't have a good answer to that question. And so I went about the task of building this incredible team of people. And quite frankly, that's a very, very honest statement. Everybody had validated. I don't know how to do payroll. I don't know how to reconcile a financial statement. I hire people for that. I don't even know how to operate the phone. I don't know how to operate the copying machine. I know when they don't work. And I don't like it when they don't work. And nobody likes to be around me when they don't work. And so, you know, in recognition of the focus that John and I need to bring to that task, I am naming Phoebe as Chief Executive Officer of the firm. And Phoebe's been just an amazing partner. She came to our firm in the middle of the financial crisis. And it was, as I've told people before in the story, she went to bat for one of my clients that was being squeezed by a bank. And she called me after I had been on this conference call, and I went, you know, a little ballistic with the bankers and told them they couldn't do what they were trying to do. And she called me afterwards and she said, "Stick to your guns. You're doing the right thing. But if you let anybody know I said that, you'll get fired." And I said, "Well, I'm going to hire you." And I put her on my task pad, and I called her about a year later, and it took about 9 months, but I hired her. And it was very obvious from the day she walked in that she was going to be in this role someday. And so it is, you know, really a source of pride to be able to bring her along. The other part of this is, how the firm runs. And Tracy Olive joined me 29 years ago. And Tracy has been responsible for the client service and the development of client service standards that you all kind of enjoy at this point. And so Tracy's going to become a member of our executive committee. And she will help Phoebe along with Ryan Hitt, who's not here today. Ryan is our Chief Technology Officer. Ryan is almost as amazing as Tracy. I have to say that. Otherwise, I'd be in trouble. But I remember Ryan, back in the summer, I was on vacation, and I got this idea about changing the whole technology platform of our firm, and I talked to some people about it, and it really is amazing. And I went to Ryan and I said, "This is what I want to do." And he said, "You can't do that." I said, "Yes, we can." And so we started the process. And it's like anything else, it just takes money. And so we've spent about $300,000 since August implementing that, and the final phases of it will be put in. Then it'll give us the most advanced technology platform of any firm in the industry. And so that's, very exciting also. The final announcement is that my daughter, Jennifer, will join the executive committee, which is actually, as a dad, you can't ask for anything more. It was a risk to hire her. And God only knows it wasn't easy. But after 9 years, she's kind of pushed me out of this job because last year she brought in more new business than I managed as business when I started the firm 18 years ago, which is just incredible. So you can tell, we take what we do. I love the money I make. But I'm more passionate about our success and the legacy that we're creating. And so it is, just join me in congratulating these great people. And the reason I wanted to take the time to explain this instead of trying to put it in writing is that I don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm slowing down. I'm just getting warmed up. And we've got a lot to do. I have no intentions of retiring. This is the greatest job in the world. It really is. It's frustrating as hell at times because you're always arguing with people. Everybody's got an opinion. And I use the example many times, Nick Saban in the fourth quarter of an Alabama football game, when he is faced with a difficult decision and the game is on the line, have you ever seen him turn around and ask the crowd what to do? And if he did, he'd end up in the seats. And I have no intentions of ending up in the seats, and neither does my firm. So thank you all, and we'll open it up to any questions you might have. My title will be Chairman and Chief Investment Officer. And that is actually a business model that my friend Ron Barron, who manages over $30 billion, adopted in his own firm about the same age as I am, and he's 78 years old and still going strong. And encouraging, one of the things that you learn, is hopefully the things that you don't know, and especially as things progress. And, surrounding yourself with young people, listening, guiding, mentoring them, it's a process that makes you more successful, and it makes everybody else more successful. You know, this next generation's amazing, the things that they can do and the things that they'll accomplish. And, you know, I think they deserve a chance, and we're going to give it to them. What else? I quieted everybody down. All right. Well, thank you very much.